This is an amazing story reported by that group of people.
Oh, in the valley?
Yeah. This is a story worth hearing.
Right.
It's not a long story. It's just one of these things that's so weird it has to be true.
I was doing an interview in Los Angeles on a radio show in Las Vegas. They had called me. I was doing a 2-hour interview with them. And in the process, I just in passing mentioned the reptilian gods and the reptilian aliens. And after the program, I got a phone call from a guy who I found out later was a very wealthy man who, as I said, owned a company that buys and sells hotels and big stuff.
Right.
And he called and he said, Jordan, we were listening to you this morning in the office. And he said, I got to tell you something. He said, I have 5 men that work for me in my office. We're all Christians and we all go to the same church. And he said, once a year, I take all 5 families in my room and we go on vacation together, always. And he says, last year, and this was like in '89 when this happened. He said, last year, we all took off to do camping in Colorado. And he said, one morning, we broke camp and we walked up to the top of the large hill and looked down into the valley. And he said in the valley there was a circle that had been cleared away. A round area circle had been cleared away. And there was a circle of people in robes. And they're all holding hands, swaying back and forth like some sort of a chant. And there was one person in the middle. And he said, when we're standing there watching this, we were startled to see people out in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
Out here in the middle of nowhere, they're doing a ritual, right? And he said, all of a sudden, it popped in the center, another person popped up, but much bigger than everybody else. And he said, when that thing popped in, it pointed up at us, and all the singing stopped, everything stopped, and everyone turned, pointed up at us. And he said, well, we were up on the top of the mountain, so we just going to get out of there. He said, we turned, and it was too late. That thing that was in the circle was behind them. He said that was at least 7.5 to 8 foot high.
Yes, it's a classic.
Huh?
It's a classic.
Yeah, and he said the thing was 7.5 to 8 foot high, reptile, and he says, and we were all paralyzed. Couldn't move. Even the children couldn't move. Nobody could move. And he said, and this thing looked at all of us, and finally it looked at the men, and he said, and when it was looking at us, we knew what it was thinking. It was basically saying, I'm going to let you go this time, but you better get out of here, because you've interrupted something. And he says, and the thing walked away, and the people were watching it, and it went, it's gone.
Classic.
And he says, and the moment it took off, everyone started screaming, because now they come back. Now they've got their faculties back. And he said the children were screaming, the women were yelling and crying. And he said, and we ran, all of us, back to our cars and drove home, and that's it. And he said, we're all Christians in a church. And when we heard you talking about reptile aliens, I got news for you. We know of at least one that's on the earth for real sure, because we saw it, all of us.
So that's a story you've heard before. That this.
Oh yes.
You've got this kind of
Yes, and the 6, 7, 8 4, 6, 7.5, 8 4 is a constant, repetitive description. I don't know. I told Bill before. When I'd been in America and I'd started picking up these stories for the first time. I mean, I'd thought about it before, but there was nothing tangible. And then suddenly I was traveling America. In 15 days, I met 12 different people who told me the same basic story about reptiles, shape-shifting, all that stuff. I come back to England, and there's a woman down the road in my town who wanted to meet me to tell me about a guy called Ted Heath, Prime Minister of Britain.
Oh, really? Ted Heath. Yeah,
Satanist. I mean, I had an amazing experience with him and his black eyes. I told you about it. But so she tells me that she was married as a mind-controlled woman. She came from Scotland. She was brought up by the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry in Scotland. And her husband was the warden of a place called Burnham Beeches. Burnham Beeches is an area of copse, woodland and clearings to the west of London near Slough, about 25 minutes drive from Chequers, which is the Prime Minister's country home, like Camp David. And it's owned by the City of London, the financial district, right? Because when you go into it, you get the logo of the City of London all over it, which is two flying reptiles holding the shield of the Knights Templar. Anyway, she tells me the story. She said she was basically a prisoner, but she said her husband was a Satanist, and the warden of Burnham Beeches is always a Satanist. They have a house in the area, right in the middle of the woods. And he's a Satanist because his job is to set up the rituals at night on certain ritual days. And after dark, you can creep around on foot, but you can't. All the roads are shut. You can't get a car in there. So she says, I was out one night with the dog. This is sometime between 70 and 74. She did tell me the year, but it had to be because he was Prime Minister at the time, Heath. And she said she saw some lights, and she walked forward and crept and looked through the wooding and the bushes, and she saw a circle of people in robes, and she recognised that the guy who was calling the shots was Ted Heath. And as she watched later, she saw that on one of his sides, I think it was his right-hand side, was a guy called Anthony Barber, who was Chancellor of the Exchequer at that time.
Tony Barber.
Barber,
yeah.
Who did devastating things to the British economy. Anyway, they're in this circle, and she said that they're doing these chants and rituals, and she told me all this story. And then, because I knew about Ted Heath from other sources by then, she wasn't surprising me with him at all. So then, because I've just come back from America, I had a cup of tea, and I was just, okay, I'm leaving now. And I was just putting my cup of tea down, and she was sitting over there. And I just said to her, I'm having some very strange experiences at the moment. I keep meeting people that say they've seen people turn into reptiles. And I turned away, and all I could hear was, and I turned back, and she said, oh my God, she said, I thought it was only me. And she said, I wasn't going to tell you this bit. She said, I thought, crazy enough what I've already told you. And she went on to tell me that while she's watching this ritual, suddenly Heath transforms into a reptile figure, grows about 2 feet. And she said once he'd done that, and she said, the thing that staggered me most? No one else in the circle was in the least bit fazed or surprised or reacted to it. And she said once he was in this mode as the reptile, he started speaking, she said, like the old transatlantic telephone lines, where where there's gaps and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
And she said that when she was walking, particularly she said at dusk, when it's just starting to get dark, at that mid-light dark, she said she would see people, always in robes, heads covered, and the faces were reptilian. And I went round there, and it's a horrible place. It's a horrible place, Burnham Beeches. But this is what these people are. People say you see Satanists everywhere. No, I see Satanists in the upper levels of society everywhere. That's what I see. There is a difference.
Yeah.
The ratio of that to the general population is massive. Of course it is. So this wherever you go in the world, Credo Muchwa talks about the Chitahuri. They're 7-8 feet. It's constant.
Common theme.
Yeah.
And then there's the other story there about Nancy.
David might not have heard that one. You should tell Nancy's story. This is one that we've already recorded, but it's a fantastic story.
I have a young lady friend who is absolutely, there's no words to describe it. This young lady is a dear friend of mine. She's so well informed on the reptilian subject because her father, she showed me all the family pictures and everything, and her father was an Air Force officer who was in charge of Project Retrievables, so that any time UFO activity on the Earth anywhere happened, he was in charge to do the investigation. And she said, so we went from base to base, never lived in the same place very long. And she said, but every time they always had a telephone, but when that phone rang, it meant that the father, had 10 minutes from the time that phone rang to be dressed with his briefcase and ready to go. And the military would drive up in front of the house, knock on the door, and she said no words were ever spoken, nothing. Just knock on the door, he goes out, gets in the car, they drive off, and when they drive off, military would be posted 4, one on each corner of the house until he comes back. And if it's a week, month, it doesn't matter. They are there to guard the house while he's gone, even on the base. She said, and so she never was ever allowed to stay home, even on the base. She was never allowed to stay home by herself. And so one night, the father would never allow it. One night, the father and mother were going next door, a couple doors down, to a party to visit some of her friends on base, and she asked her mother to let her stay home because they're not going to be that far. And the father said, absolutely not. Well, the mother finally talked the father into allowing it, so he allowed it. And so they went over to the neighbor's house, and she said for the first time in her life, she's finally in the house by herself. And she said she was sitting in the bedroom, combing her hair, had a bit mirror, and behind her was a walk-in closet. And she said while she was combing her hair, the door slid open, and a reptile stepped out, but he had to step down to get out from under the head of her. And stood there, and was standing almost touching the ceiling, like 7.5 foot, 8 foot ceiling. And she said he looked at her, and she's looking at him in the mirror, and she said, I've never been so frightened in my life because it's a reptile. And she's looking at him, and he's looking at her. And then she said he started moving, but not with his feet. He started floating toward her. And she said, I got the impression it's like coming up on a fly. And she said, I knew he's getting closer. And she said she jumped up, stumbled, ran down the hallway, ran into the bathroom, locked the door, opened up the window, and started screaming. Well, everybody in the neighborhood heard it. And she said, and then this thing, she said she could feel it coming down the hallway because it was very heavy. And it walked down the hallway behind her and started growling like an animal and clawing at the bathroom door. And she said then when her father and the other neighbors come running up, this thing heard them and walked back down. She said it just walked back down the hallway and went back into the bedroom. And she said when her father came in, she said they got her out and there was huge claw marks on the bathroom door. And the father said, this is why I didn't want her staying by herself. This is the reason. And then he told them, everybody, he told the family, he says, we've been warned by these reptile aliens that they're tired of us sticking our nose into their business. So they told me, just remember, you come out to put your nose in our business, we're going to send somebody into your home. And he said, that's why you've always had the military guarding the house, even on the base, because these things are interdimensional.
Yeah, exactly.
They can pop in at any time.
Exactly.
Not that guards on the corners are going to make any difference if the thing suddenly materialises in the walk-in closet, you know.
That's right.
That's the way they think, though, isn't it? It's the way they think. I've got to have some guns. That'll sort them.
Not at all.
But, I mean, it makes you wonder how often these things happen and we never get to hear it.
Oh, absolutely. Loads of times. I met a power dressing businesswoman in Vancouver who was still shaking when she told me the story, and it was years earlier it had happened. She met this guy. She said he had a dark side, but his other side was all right. She said, and she brought him back to the house, and they went into the bedroom to have sex, right? And the biggest secret, the first book I ever wrote, bringing this in, 1998 or so, 97 or something, was on a shelf above the bed, standing on its own. And he went apeshit, she said, and laid into her about reading and stuff like that. And she said, so much so, I had to buy your book twice, she said, because I threw the bloody thing out after the experience that came. She said, and then I thought, no, I'll read this again. So they start having sex, she said, and he's on top of her and starts to get really, really rough, and she starts to get frightened. And she says, I've got my hand on the bottom of his back, right at the bottom of his back. She said, and suddenly my hand was pushed up by something. She said, I looked over his shoulder, and he'd sprouted a freaking tail. His tail had pushed her hand back. She screamed and threw him off the bed, and he stood there, she said, just for like a split second, two seconds maybe, in full reptilian form, and then just morphed back into human and left the house as fast as he could. I've heard these stories so often, you know. Some people think that I've sat in a dark room and thought, yeah, I know what's going on. It's all reptiles. It's people you meet, isn't it? People tell you their experiences, and then you put the strands together and you get the picture. It's hard research. It's not. It's obvious. Pulling it out the ether.
Well, that's what I said. There's too much proof out there. There's too many stories. Too many stories.
That's why it's so valuable. You're coming out with the stories that you know, because otherwise everyone thinks that it's all on David, because it's so hard to talk about this stuff without attracting ridicule. And the more people who talk about this, the more acceptance there will be, because it'll be a phenomenon and not just somebody making up silly stories.
I have a doctor friend, and he has an apartment complex, and he said he put up one of the apartments for rent. And this young man wanted the apartment, so he said, so I was interviewing him. And he was sitting on the sofa, and he said, I had some paperwork, and I was just kind of interviewing him. And he says, and I looked over, and now there's two of them. He has another one just like him. Two of them now. And they're talking to each other. And they're identical. And he said, I was shocked. There's two of them now, and they're both talking to each other. And then they both look at him, and he said, I said to this kid, what is this? And he said, oh, I'm sorry, this is my other self. And he said, what are you talking about, your other self? And he said, oh, I'm sorry. He said, well, go on. And so the other one just disappeared. And he says, I don't know what this is all about, but I don't want you in my apartment. So I'm thinking, there's a lot of not only reptilian stuff going on.
Hold on, I make that point. There's loads of different forms.
I would tell you about the time I was in Hawaii with my wife. And the two guys, somebody came into the restaurant, I don't know who it was, and I had to run. Did I tell you that?
Oh, you told me, yeah. You told us that story. And you had this voice in your head, basically, that just said, run, run, run. And that's
You're
what you
in trouble. Your life is in danger. Run quick. Your life is in danger. Run quick. And it was involuntary. I didn't think to run. They motivated the brain to do it. I just got up and ran.
That's right.
And I didn't even think to do it.
Yeah.
And I ran all the way across the street, ran around the Hilton Hotel, the Hilton Village, and out to the ocean. And then the voice said, you're all right now. You're okay. And I sat there and I couldn't believe what I'd just done. And it's happened to me twice. It happened to me in Los Angeles after that, another time.
And of course, because you avoided the danger, you never knew what the danger was. You didn't want to hang around to find out what it was that you were meant to be avoiding. Yeah. What a wild story. Yeah.
But now look back on it, it now makes sense that if, as I have been told so many times, you have been brought here, then maybe there is an alien presence here that is my natural enemy. And I don't even know it.
Sure.
But somebody who's with me here knows it.
Yeah.
And when they get too close to me, too close of proximity to me, I'm not in any way, shape, or form prepared to confront that kind of dark power. So they just get me out quick.
It's the easiest solution. Yeah, right.
It's like having an FBI guy in the mob, and the mob finds out who he is. Mm-hmm. The FBI has to go in and get him out quick because he's a dead man.
Yeah.
Every minute he stays in there, his life is in danger. So it's like they got to get you out quick. So I ran. I've got a great picture in color of Bush Sr. waving at someone, and they zoomed in on him waving, and he's got webbed.
Webbed hands.
Yeah.
I've never heard that one before.
Yeah, I've got a picture. I'll show it to you.